Good morning and half a day. Welcome to the Guam Congress Building, the People's House. It is now 9:02 on Friday, March 21, 2025, and I'd like to welcome all to the public hearing room here in the Guam Congress Building. I am Senator Chris Dueñas, Chairman on the Committee on Finance and Government Operations, and we are here for an informational briefing with the Department of Administration and the Office of Public Accountability. First notice of this informational briefing was disseminated to all senators and media outlets on March 14, 2025, and its second notice disseminated on March 19, 2025. The notices were also made available on the Guam Legislature's website, our legislative calendar, and the Government of Guam's public notice portal. I'd like to welcome my esteemed colleagues who have joined me this morning. At this time, I'm joined by the Vice Speaker and also the Vice Chair of this committee, and also Senator Tello Taitagui. Thank you for being here this morning. So thank you for joining us, and I'll go ahead and just go over the agenda, and then I'll go over the agenda, and then I'll make my opening statement. Okay? So the agenda today is as follows. Of course, we called to order already, opening remarks. I'll be doing that soon. We have the Office of the Public Accountability, and he'll be doing 2023 government-wide audit highlights, trial balances timing, and miscellaneous as they see fit to report. Then we will turn over to Department of Administration for responses to questions, and they will be answering questions that the committee had already pre-sent to them on Monday. They will be doing a presentation on audit timing, 2024 government-wide audit release update, GFMIS update, and miscellaneous as they see fit to report to the committee. We will do questions, of course, with our panel as well, and then we'll close out and adjourn after that. So now I'll move to my opening statement. But before I do, I would also like to thank Senator Chris Barnett for coming and joining us this morning. Thank you, Senator. The purpose of today's briefing is our intent to foster constructive dialogue and ensure transparency as we address critical matters related to the fiscal health and operational integrity of our government. First and foremost, we will discuss the importance of timely audit reporting, a cornerstone of accountability and a tool to promote trust in government operations. Accurate and prompt reporting allows us to make informed decisions that will benefit our community and safeguard public resources. Additionally, sound fiscal discipline remains a priority, particularly in the context of appropriations. Our commitment to responsible financial management is crucial to maintain stability and addressing the needs of Guam residents effectively. We are also set to receive a general update on the ongoing implementation and cutover to the new financial management information system. This transition represents a significant milestone for modernizing our processes and enhancing efficiency across the board. As we continue to navigate this transition, we look forward to hearing updates and insights on its progress. Finally, we encourage open and collaborative discussion on other items that may require your attention today. Your expertise and contributions are invaluable as we work together to uphold excellence in the governance and accountability. Thank you again for your dedication and participation in these discussions. Let us proceed with a spirit of cooperation and commitment to Guam's continued prosperity. So I just wanted to add to this opening statement that we all know that we are in some very interesting times when it comes to our budgets and the fiscal position of the government of Guam. It went from being very, very difficult with time-to-time deficits and very hard to manage to really historic appropriations above adopted levels. So we have done well financially, but we've also done something quite different and historic that we traditionally did not do in the fashion that we've been doing it. And that is appropriating revenues in a current fiscal year, and now without proper and timely audited financials. My reason for wanting to get to the bottom of this before we soon go into the fiscal, the season of the budget season, is to ensure that we have reliable methods, reliable numbers in the absence of a timely audit presented, and that we learn the issues that presented this probably one of the most extreme, I'm going to be kind, tardiness of the fiscal year 2023 audit, and if those reasons have been fleshed out, and we can now count on timely audits and timely submissions so we can make sound decisions, not only in this current fiscal year as we travel through it, but sound decisions going into the fiscal 2026 budget. I look forward to collaboration on this. This, to me, the importance when we talk about finances is the importance of getting it right for our people. There are many competing interests in terms of all the members of this body, and true interests at that. I don't, assuage any any motivations for any senator who wants to, try to help our government and our people. I'm just making sure that when we make these decisions, it's done soundly and that we won't represent things that we can't deliver on. So with that, I would like to, at this time, turn the floor over to Speaker Benjamin Cruz, Guam's elected public auditor, and his staff for the presentation that we've asked them to make this morning. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Auditor, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before I start on the presentation and the PowerPoint presentation that we have, I probably should address something that you just mentioned about the timeliness. You were at the conference this last week with all the auditors, and your colleagues were not. And so maybe for their benefit and for the public's benefit, we should also mention some of the things that I discussed during that conference. We currently have a major problem on the island and throughout the Pacific, and actually, if you had a chance to talk to the HEA president that was there, it's a problem that's across the country. We're not turning out as many accountants and auditors from the colleges and universities that we need. We in Guam, about 3 years ago, had a very major setback. Deloitte closed. And when Deloitte closed, that left us with only one really big firm here, EY, Ernst & Young. We also have Berger Comer that does some audits, but they don't have the capacity to do the large kind of audits that are required for the government of Guam. They're able to do the retirement fund because they've been doing it since, I think, the turn of the century. But we don't have the number of auditors here. EY, in doing their audits, trying to meet the needs of us and the Pacific and our fellow governments in the Pacific, has had to fly in auditors from the Philippines, from Japan, from Malaysia, and wherever they can in the Pacific. They're bringing them in to try to address the need. They're really struggling. On the other end of it, audits would be easier to complete if we had competent and well-trained auditors and accountants in all the departments. If you guys take the time to read the audit and the compliance report, and for everybody who has any idea of wanting to run for governor, I really, really suggest you have to read the compliance report and the management letter. When I do the presentation, you'll understand that. But you've got to read that because you'll find there in the compliance report findings that tell us what we need to do to get things up. why we have all of these deficiencies and what needs to be done and how you have to address the need for more accountants for the Department of Administration, for GDOE especially, for public health, and for all the agencies that are reporting. They're out there. GDOE during COVID was handling $2 billion worth of funds without a CFO. But those things need to be addressed by those of you in management. We can only point it out in the audits, but unless you read it and you guys do something to address it, we're going to continue to have that problem. If we had competent people in the departments, we could get all the information together so that when the year-end closes or throughout the year, they can do monthly closings, quarterly closings, and at the end of the year, be able to do it in a reasonable fashion. We just don't have that personnel. And so, as a consequence, both our deficiencies and the fact that we don't have sufficient outside auditors is going to make for delayed audit reports. I think you were there when the public auditor from Palau stood up and said they haven't even gotten their 22 out. We got our 23 out, at least maybe in February. It might have been late in February, but we got it out. But the rest of the FAS states, marshals, and the rest of the Federated States and Palau, they haven't gotten theirs out, their 22 out yet. I think one of them is back at 21, just trying to get the attention of EY to get it. So I think everybody just has to understand that. And the other thing that I want to say in the beginning when we start, the reason why we have to do these audits, some of the public may be wondering, the reason why we have to do this is we borrowed $917 million in bonds. $917 million. One of the major covenants in those bonds is that there has to be an annual audit. And that annual audit can be expensive. On top of it, we have to do a single audit because we have about $700 million annually in federal programs that have to be addressed. And each one of those needs to be looked at by the auditor. And before COVID, they had to look at about 12 or 13 different items, whether cash management, procurement, just a whole number of things. During COVID, thankfully, about a half a dozen of those were deemed to be unnecessary to look at. But still, you had to do quite a bit. The GovGuam audit this year cost $625,000. Next year is going to cost us $637,000. We really have to, that investment has to be utilized by those of you in positions of power, and so I thank you for having this informational hearing, because my staff will be able to walk us through the highlights and some of the things that you need to look at when you go in there. But the thing is that until such time as we can turn out the requisite number of accountants and auditors from the university and into the firms, and especially into the departments, so they can be appropriately managed and operated. They're going to have a difficult time in trying to get the information from public health, from the Department of Corrections, from wherever, all the component units that need to be, they need. Thankfully, we do audits of the major component units, GPA, GWA, and the port and the airport, and so their audits are done separately. and they have decent staff. And the GovGuam audit cannot go out until you have all those component units, because they're of a size that it's material, that whatever information they have is material to the audits that is going to have to be produced by the government of Guam. But the government of Guam, Department of Administration, still has to deal with public health, which has hundreds of millions of dollars in funds. And when they don't respond or are unable to respond because they don't have the capacity, because they don't have the requisite number of accountants and program coordinators that understand what needs to be done, they're going to be behind. And so it really needs, we all need to work together to get them trained. And the one thing that I'll use this time to make a recommendation, and the University of Guam does very well with their compliance, and the RCUOG and CEDARS. I think something that I would like to recommend that we talk to the university about doing an internship or some kind of allowing people from the various departments to come and spend a month or two working with the program coordinators in RCUOG or at CEDARS, so they learn how to do how to handle federal grants, because RCUOG and CEDARS has successfully been able to come out with very few, if any, compliance problems. And so if the government can work together to get everybody up there, then everybody will understand you have to turn in your reports, you have to do certain things to segregate, but they've got to be trained, because otherwise it makes it impossible for them, Department of Administration, to get the report ready. And as a consequence, you're going to have to be sending back reconciliations requests months and months and months afterwards. That cannot be, that should be alleviated by having people with the capacity and competence to do it in the department. So with that as my opening spiel, we have a presentation. If you will allow me, I'll have Vince Dueñas do the presentation from my office before I lose my voice again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your opening statement, and I really like your tie. Please proceed, Vince.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, Senators, and thank you really for this opportunity to present the Government of Guam's fiscal year 2023 financial audit. My name is Vincent Dueñas. I am the Supervising Accountability Auditor. I've been with the office since 2003. And to echo the sentiment, Senator Dueñas, that you said in your opening statement, this is actually, I can corroborate your statement about this being something new, something that is being tried for the first time, because in all of my years since 2003, I don't recall the opportunity to come before your body to give a presentation on the financial audits. This is, at least in my memory, since 2003 that we've been able to do that. We have been able to, like we just did a couple days ago on Wednesday, given the presentation of our performance audits, and that's always appreciated, because that's really what our bread and butter is at the OPA with all of our auditors. But with respect to all the financial audits that our office oversees, there's a lot of hands that go into the preparation of this, and it's just not the Office of Public Accountability. It's really DOA. A lot of their employees, from the accountants to the accounting technicians, all the analysts. It deals with a lot of employees over at BBMR, with the analysts that they have there, with all the various agencies. And with respect to this particular audit that I'm going to present, this is just the government-wide audit. There are 27 other audits that are conducted that our office oversees the contracts for, and that what the public auditor just mentioned, like UOG, GCC, GPA, GWA, all of those have their own separate audit. So again, in those various agencies, they have a lot of hands too that are putting together all of these documents, presenting it to the auditors so that we can go through the process of reviewing and identifying any issues that are happening. So like what we did on Wednesday, that was a performance audit, and I wanted to give the analogy about what the differences are. So with the performance audits, those are more like, like using the doctors and the hospital setting. That's more so like specialists, right? So us as performance auditors, we're actually going into a particular program or agency and looking at something very specific. Whereas in the case of the financial audit, this is more so like your annual checkup. So this is the exercise that every government or the government of Guam in particular, and all those other agencies that I mentioned, go through every year just to do that annual checkup, just to see how things are. So with the presentation that we have, if we have the, AV guys, thank you guys. So for GovGuam's FY 2023 financial audit, just as an overview, and by the way, if you wanted to follow along or even see what all these, what I'm referring to, you could go to our website at www.opaguam.org and download this 227, just for the basic financial statements, which is, I'm giving the overview, okay? So this is, we only have 3 hours that we're scheduled for. This could take, and if any or also any senators wanted a presentation, just like we did for you, Senator Dueñas, our office is always ready and willing to give this presentation. Okay, so the next slide, just a basic overview for FY 2023. The general fund had a surplus of 59.76 million that resulted in a fund balance of 195.23 million. So of the general fund surplus of 59.76 million, it resulted from realizing revenues higher and incurring expenditures lower than budgeted. Of this amount, 14.56 million was transferred to the rainy day fund. In October 2023, which was the beginning of FY 2024, through Public Law 37-43, the 37th Guam Legislature actually appropriated 30 million of this surplus to provide for emergency funds for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. Okay, next slide. Regarding audit issuance, and the public auditor had also mentioned it, this audit was issued in February 2025, more than a year since the fiscal year 2023 ended in September 2023. The independent financial auditors that were contracted for this audit, Ernst & Young LLP, I want to give a special mention or shout out to them too, because they did conduct this audit, and their team. They issued a modified or a clean opinion on the government of Guam's financial statements. And again, as the public auditor alluded to earlier, the delay was due to the delayed issuance of GovGuam and other agencies' financial audit reports and the lack of responsiveness to audit requests. And I'm going to show you a slide later on that shows when those particular audits were issued. Okay, next slide. Regarding the primary government, the 69.62 million increase in total primary government program and general revenues was insufficient in offsetting the increase in total expenses of 108.52 million. As a result, the primary government's change in net position decreased to 78.52 million in FY 2023, in contrast to 122.34 million in FY 2022. The 78.52 million increase that primary government's activities negative net position from 2.34 billion in FY 22 to 2.6 billion in FY 2023. Next slide. What the general fund, or I'm sorry, if I didn't mention this before, the financial statements, that 227-page document that we are talking about, we call it the big audit. So if I refer to it, that's, I'm referring really to the big audit. This huge document, like I said, so many hands have gone into it. Within this big audit, it really encompasses, like what the public auditor was saying, if you want to run for governor, anything you need to know about the government of Guam is archived in this particular audit and all the audits that we've had in the past. It's really just the snapshot of what had happened over the course of the years. And again, I want to thank you for holding this particular informational hearing, because in our office, we have audits that date back all the way to 1997. That's when the office was first created, or it was created in 1992, but didn't really start getting off its feet until 1996, 97, and that's when audits like this were first started. So if you are interested in looking at all those audits, they're all on our website, but if you want the hard copy, we have a bookshelf full of these audits that if you wanted to review. The general fund. The general fund is GovGuam's primary operating fund. Expenditures increase in FY23 by 168.58 million. So it went from 713.17 million in 22 to 881.75 in 23. The increase in total general fund expenditures of 168.5 million was greater than the increase in the total revenues of 150.80 million. As a result, the general fund's change in fund balance decreased to 59.76 million in contrast to 105.12 million in FY 2022. The next slide really is just a graph just to show the trend, 5-year trend from FY 2019 through 2023, how revenues have been going up from pre-COVID in 2019 of 700, and this is in millions, okay? So 700 million all the way up to 965 million, or 964.76 million. Expenditures in FY 2019 went from 672 million in FY19, and then it also gradually increased all the way to, and then in FY23, it went up to 881.74 million. And then it also shows the deficit or fund balance. So there was a deficit in FY19 of 47.8 million, and then as was discussed in the opening statement, there was a surplus of 195 million for FY 2023. Thank you. Next slide. Just continuing on the general fund, most of the expenditure categories increased with significant increases in these. I'll just mention these particular categories. Payments to the Guam Power Authority by 47.39 million, from 15.83 million to 63.22 million, primarily due to the energy credit program. General government expenditures by 46.76 million, from 56 to 102.77 million, primarily due to the 38.4 million in medical self-insured fund expenditures for GovGuam's self-insured group health plan. And then public education expenditures by 33.7 million, from 192.24 million to 225.95 million, primarily due to a 33.47 million increase in GDOE's expenditures for operations, and the 22% general pay plan increase. As you recall, that's when the 22% kicked in actually during this fiscal year. And in the next slide is just to show you, in the 227-page document with the big audit, this is just a snapshot of, for example, the medical self-insured fund. And it basically, this is how everything is kind of like categorized and shows you the numbers. What we did in this particular, with our highlights, and that's our practice since the previous public auditor, is always just to give the highlights, because who's going to go through this 227-page document and really understand it? So it's our opportunity to really just highlight not only what we see is relevant and what would be of interest to you, the legislature, and all of our stakeholders, but also what management through DOA or the governor's office has incorporated in their management discussion and analysis, which is also included in the financial statements. So with this particular fund that's currently on the screen, yeah, it talked about the self-insured fund expenditures and how revenues where 24 is really small, 24 million, and then the expenditures was 38. I mentioned it earlier, and then, yeah, so. Okay, the next slide, budget to actual. So what was included in this FY 2020, the next slide, please. Thank you. What was included in this year's FY23 financial statements was a schedule that included the budget to actual. In FY23, the general fund actual net change in fund balance was 42.04 million, or 167.05 million more than the final budgeted amount at negative 125.01 million. The significant differences between budget and actual amounts were from 70.86 million in income tax. So what was actually budgeted was 365.81 million, and what was actual was 436.66 million. Another item that was significant was 40.66 million in GRT. What was budgeted was 327.95 million. What was actual was 368.61 million. And then, of course, with Typhoon Mawar expenditures, what was budgeted was 48.3 million versus the actual was 6.37 million. So what you were saying, Senator, earlier in the beginning about the importance of having this information and going forward and with all the upcoming budget deliberations that you're going to have, this is the information that is critical and crucial to this, really the important decisions that this body has to make. Okay, moving on. Federal Grants Assistance Fund. This is something that the public auditor had mentioned in his opening statements. The way that this one is categorized or accounted for is as a special revenue fund known as the Federal Grants Assistance Fund. This is Fund 101. It's a special fund that accounts for all federal assistance grants and contracts used by GovGuam from the U.S. government or operations. The Federal Grants Assistance Fund's revenues increased by 71.39 million, or from 507.85 million in 22 to 579.24 million in 23. As of FY23, or as of September 30th, 2023, the Federal Grants Assistance Fund owes the general fund 58.51 million. This is a 22.25 or a 75% increase from 33.26 million in FY 2022.
If I might interject at this point, Senators, put a pin in that because you might want to ask what that is in 24 and what it is currently in 25. But I'll let him continue, but I just wanted to ask you to put a pin in that.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. The 58.51 million receivable includes 10.08 million in uncollectible amounts due to 6.55 million in expired grants from the Homeland Security and 3.53 million in grants dated September 30th, 2022 and prior. These uncollectible amounts were left uncorrected as they were immaterial to the financial statements as a whole. Then the next slide, it basically talks about the uncorrected misstatements relative to accounts and disclosures. This is just to basically show that they believe that the effects of any uncorrected summarized in the accompanying schedule accumulated by you during the current period and pertaining to the latest period presented are basically immaterial. You have another comment?
This is, I included this slide to show you where we came to that conclusion, because I know the legislature had a hearing on Homeland Security and how much of the $12 million was going to be collected. And I just wanted to show you that in this audit, we had already lost 10.6.
Oh yeah, that's correct. So if you recall, we had an oversight hearing over the Guam Homeland Security, and there were some, was mention of the amounts that were potentially, we actually found it in, like I said, the devil's in the details with this particular audit, and we found that it was 10.08 million that was identified as uncollectible. Yeah. Moving on, the American Rescue Plan Act Assistance Fund. The ARPA is also a special revenue fund, and this accounts for federal assistance grants under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. As of September 30th, 2023, GovGuam had $252.88 million in cash and cash equivalents from the ARPA Assistance Fund. The ARPA funding was to be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and paid out by December 31st, 2026. On December 31st, 2024, the entire remaining ARPA balance, including $133 million, was obligated toward infrastructure for the new hospital construction site in Mingilao. Next slide, other special revenue funds. We wanted to point out that in this, again, 200-plus page document, there are a lot of special revenue funds that are accounted for, but we wanted to highlight these particular ones. Special revenue funds are basically special legislation that was created by the legislature for a specific purpose, for a fund to collect money and to spend money on a very, very specific purpose. So these are actually restricted purposes that they have. One fund was the emergency rental assistance. Revenues went down, 5.94 in intergovernmental, and then expenditures also went down 5.83 in public welfare. For the Healthy Futures Fund, revenues went down by $5.51 million in tobacco taxes, and expenditures went up 3.65 in community services and 2.05 million in general government. The Territorial Highway Fund, revenues went down by 5.97 million in liquid fuels taxes, and then expenditures went up 9.25 in payments to the airport, and then it went down in 4.54 million in transportation and $2.99 million in individual and collective rights. And of course, the Tourist Attraction Fund for FY23, hotel taxes went up, revenues of 10.35 million. Expenditures also went up, 6.36 million in payments to GVB and 2.44 million to the general government. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, in addition to the financial statements that 200+ report, the government of Guam is also required to go through a single audit. This was a separate report that was issued, and it is also, 117 pages for this one in particular. This is where we actually look at all the federal spending and any findings that would happen. So with this particular slide, again, if you wanted to see where we're getting our monies from the federal government and where we're spending the money, and where we're getting it from, which particular agency or program, there's a schedule of expenditure of federal awards, or what we commonly call the CFA. So with the CFA, it really just itemizes all the monies monies that were spent from each particular federal agency. So the grand total for FY23 was $688 million that was spent in federal funds. Okay. Moving on to the compliance audit. Just as a basic overall summary, there were $15.5 million in question costs, 34 findings, of which 12 were repeat findings. There were 16 material weaknesses, 11 significant deficiencies, and there were 9 federal programs with qualified opinions. Moving on to the next slide, just a brief what the findings with the most question costs were. The Child Care Development Fund is a subrecipient monitoring. It had 9.5 million in question costs for the lack of monitoring activities to ensure funds are spent per the grant terms and conditions to meet the single audit requirements. The Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds of 4 million for basically insufficient support and no procurement file, and then 645,000 for the Environmental Protection Consolidated Grants. And the reason was for the unreconciled program income records and no justification of uses of excess income. The most common finding, next slide, areas that were reported with the 9 findings. The sub-awards are not reported in the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act sub-award reporting system. The FFRs did not reconcile with accounting records or the AS400. Reported expenditures in USAspending.gov did not reconcile with the GEER1 report submitted. Grant years 2019 through 2023 expenditures reported per the ACF 696 were not supported by accounting records. And then the CMS 64 expenditures were underreported compared to the AS 400. Next slide. In addition to the single audit, we also, auditors actually also issued a management letter. This one is not as long, 8 pages, so that was the easiest of the bunch to read. However, it just basically identified 29 deficiencies related to internal control over financial reporting. DOA received a majority of the comments, such as uncorrected misstatements, fund deficits, the impact of potential liabilities for the MIP and Medicaid programs and how they were not assessed, and then receivables due from federal agencies and intergovernmental revenues were not recorded. So like what we mentioned, I think it was Senator Taitigui when you came in here and said it's Friday, yay. Thank you for for saying that. This really is, the crux of the audit the general overview financial highlights. We love this. I mean, for me, I love seeing all of these findings and giving this presentation. Moving forward, as part of the agenda, Senator, you also had another item we wanted to discuss for FY 2024. So the next slide actually identifies where we're at or currently with the FY 2024 financial audits. Like the public auditor mentioned in its opening statement, these agencies need to get in before the general fund, the basic financial statements, the big audit can get started and go out. Our office oversees the 27 plus contracts for the financial auditors. Pending initiation on the top right, the GovGuam Retirement Fund, Mount Carmel Academy Charter School, the Tourist Attraction Fund, the Healthy Futures Fund. In October, we held entrance conferences for these particular agencies: Port Authority, Guahan Academy Charter School, GIDA, UOG, Guam Solid Waste Authority. Oh, it's a timeline, sorry. August, we also held for the, we also have to do the charter schools, so like SIPA, Career Tech. We held the entrance conferences in August. Then in November, we had, right after the close of the fiscal year for FY 2024, we wanted, to get right on it because we didn't want the excuse to be, oh, the OPA is holding up anything. So we had 11 entities that we had the entrance conferences. This is basically for us to get the audit started and make sure everybody meets who needs to be met, letting everyone know who the points of contact are, and then also establishing timelines on when we expect status updates and the audits to actually be issued. So we actually work backwards. The audit contracts, as we mentioned in previous testimonies before the legislature, we have been we've been moving the deadline because by June 30th is when the big audit is supposed to be submitted or completed. Taking that into account, we're moving all the other component units here, and we're trying to backtrack and say, okay, so if we're going to have it out by that day, we need to establish or put in the contracts to have them done by February 28th so that by March 31st, the big audit could at least be started or at least have drafts ready. Okay, so for this particular slide, I just wanted to show you that for FY 2024, we're on it to get all of these agencies ready so that the big audit can get started. Another issue that we've been, not only us, but with what's particularly DOA is the OPEB. And I don't know, did you want to go over this one?
Can you expound on that, Mr. Speaker? Because I even noticed we had some guests in the conference, and they saw OPEB, and it's a nice acronym, but nobody could wrap their mind around it and understand it. So can you explain this one?
I wish I could. We actually have to hire an actuary to do this. OPEB, definitionally, provides other post-employment benefits. So that's the OPEB, other post employment benefits. As you know, GovGuam provides health and life insurance to employees, retirees, and their survivors and their qualifying children. And because of the fact that GovGuam did not establish a trust fund to do this, you do the annual appropriation for the $2,200 and for the insurance for everybody. Because there is no trust fund for that, we have to account for it somehow in the audit, so that everybody knows that you have this outstanding liability out there, that you may think that, oh, you met all your obligations today, but down the line you have hundreds of millions of dollars each one of the agencies is on the hook for eventually having to pay for the OPEB for all the retirees and their survivors and dependents. The cost of these benefits is funded annually by your appropriations in the budget, and with some component units bearing the cost. Government accounting standards require the reporting of this, and the audit engagement letter was signed this year. Included in the next audit, I wanted to show that I've been trying to get on top of this. I sent a message to the Director of Administration in November that I want us to know what the status of the OPEB was, because OPEB really can be done early. It didn't need to wait for the end of the fiscal year, because it's dependent on the census of the previous calendar year. And so when I was doing the the entrance conference, as you saw on that last slide, for one of the agencies, actually it was a couple of the GWA and GP and GDOE, both of them mentioned that none of them had been asked for their census. So I immediately sent a note to the director asking about the OPEB status, and because I was getting word that agencies were not, had not been asked for the information. I did not get a reply on that. Oh, well, I got a reply that it was on track. In December, again, I messaged, I wanted to know what was going on, and because Department of Education at that point had said they still had not given a census report. Again, I got word that it was on track and that there was no problem. In January, I asked for status. There was no response. January 7th. And in January 21st, I emailed the director stating that agencies will be contacted to provide census data. In February, the actuary requested for information on active and retired employees, and the actuary stated they are on track to provide the report in mid-March. This last weekend, I got copied on a series of emails between Department of Administration and the actuary stating that there's still some stuff that's not been done. So the OPEB that I thought was going to be done by the mid of March doesn't look like it's going to be done until the end of this, maybe the end of this month. As a consequence, I have the component units that were supposed to be released on February 28th. They're sitting waiting for their OPEB numbers so they can finalize their, and so as a consequence, we've not released any of the component units. I think as we speak, the first audit for FY24 is going out, and that's the Guahan Academy Charter School that we started off, and they don't need the OPEB numbers, so that was just released. So that's our report for the audits. The component units probably won't be able to get out by the end of this month because OPEB's not done. Hopefully we can get them out, some of them in February and March. April and May. Hopefully we can get them out in February, April and May. And a couple of them, I'm hoping that we can really move on them. PBS, I really feel bad for, because PBS has had to suffer this OPEB problem for the last couple of years, and their delayed issuance of their audit has cost them. This last year, they got a waiver. The first year we had an OPEB problem a couple of years ago. The second year they got they were told they could have an extension. But the third year we had a problem with OPEB, they were penalized 1% for every month that they were delayed. And so it's imperative that we get this OPEB done early so that none of the departments have to suffer as a consequence, and the component units can get their audits out on the 28th of February, and we can work on trying to get the government of Guam one out. In our contract it says March 31st, but at least by June, so that you can have it for your audit. I guess that'll close out our presentation.
Mr. Speaker and Mr. Dueñas, I just want to say that in my entire time dealing with the government of Guam as a part of it or outside of it, the OPA has no locks on its doors. It is the most open, agency to walk into, or instrumentality of the government. I just thank you for inviting all of our colleagues, even for training, for any opportunities, and I've never had anyone complain to me that they've had any trouble working with your office and getting this critical information. Before I turn over to DOA, and thank you once again for this presentation, I just wanted to say that, this is not a wet blanket statement, but the audit says this, even in just the highlights. And as you said, the details have a lot of nuggets, and it's a long trail there. The picture of this audit is not as rosy as it would look when you see the big numbers. Because of the expenditures and because of the net position, actually with the largest excess revenues, our net position actually changed to downward. And the other issue really is, in terms of budgeting, the one that jumped off the page for me, and I'm glad that you put that slide in there, is the $34 million that we had to expend when we transitioned into the self-insurance program. That situation would have not been, I just want this one comment from you, Mr. Auditor, Mr. Speaker. That situation would have been extremely problematic in any other fiscal year whereby we weren't tracking such excess revenues. Would you concur with that position?
Probably. That was the reason why I know it was just the last line in that sentence, but that was one of the reasons why there was a loss. And so I included it, and I know I've chided everybody about not reading the audit, my highlights as closely as possible, because there was, all this was in the highlights. And when I issued the audit in February, I was expecting an outcry about this self-pay health insurance expenditure and the loss of the $10 million, but crickets. And so I thought that nobody's reading it. And that's why my plea to everybody is, we've invested $625,000 to do this. There are all the deficits, the deficiencies that somebody has to look at. Someone in management has to look at that and try to correct it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor, and to your office staff. So with that, we'll now transition over to the agenda items provided to Department of Administration, a series of questions to kind of take us through where we're at, some explanations. I think the public auditor is and has been very generous, and in my meeting with you, Mr. Byrne, I do agree that the issue we have right now in terms of auditors and audit staff and qualified individuals is a serious, serious problem. And I did listen to that presentation, of course, at the AGA conference. You'll be happy to know that we still have the outgoing and incoming president of AGA that is on our OFB staff. So they're very cognizant of this issue as well. But I do note that you brought that up as a number of different complications that exist with this, with DOA. So at this time, Mr. Byrne, I turn over to you, and please introduce yourselves, both of you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, Senators. I'm Edward Byrne, the Director of the Department of Administration. On my right is Teresa Rivers, who's the CFO at the Department of Administration. If I may, I would like to follow a similar format that the public auditor followed, and I will make a few opening remarks and try and put our remarks that we have on our slides, which I will ask the CFO to speak about. But I want to put everything into context, especially, from the point of view of management, basically. Department Administration is tasked with managing all these numbers and these finances. As Mr. Dueñas said, the audit consists of a large number of pages. If you put those two reports together, it's about 500 pages. It's very, very hard to accumulate and understand all the information in those pages. At the very beginning of the audit, there's a management discussion and analysis. And that's our opportunity to talk about what we think are the really important things that we want the reader to look at should they open this very large volume. It's different from the highlights that the public auditor has, because it's written from a perspective of management rather than a perspective of an audit. And that's how it should be. That commentary is required by GASB, but we don't spend a lot of time dealing with it, and it costs, we have internal costs too. It takes a lot of time to compile, not because we have to under GASB, but because we want to explain the numbers. We've also issued a PAFA, a simplified type of report. It's on our website. I want to try and actually send it to the legislature in a hard copy format and other interested parties, because it's graphical and it's an attempt to show the numbers that are in here in a graphical and easy to understand format. As far as the audit itself, I would like to, and if I get nothing else over, I would like to get this information over to senators. There are really 3 financial reports within the audit. There's the government-wide report that includes all the liabilities, such as the OPEB liability, such as the pension deficit. That report is done, as we explain, in a way that's similar to businesses. It's not done on a government-wide basis. It's done as if the government were a business. And some of the numbers that Mr. Dueñas pulled out come from that report. which, as was also mentioned, also includes the component units. The second set of financials is the governmental funds report, and that's the one we generally concentrate on, because that's the one where we're reporting the surplus and deficit. That report is included because we have to report and want to report the availability of funds for the government to meet its liabilities. And that's the surplus or deficit that we talk about. At the very beginning of the MD&A, the Management Discussion Analysis, there's a graph that shows the trend in the surplus and deficit. And as was pointed out, for the last 6 years, it's shown a surplus. Come back to that point in a minute later. Unfortunately, it's only one page, but the third set of financials is and it's included in the schedules of required supplementary information, is the revenue expenditure budget comparison. It's very important that we look at this because this includes encumbrances. None of the other reports include encumbrances. So when you're looking from your point of view at compiling a budget, this report is really, really important. The other reports which are compiled on accounting basis do not include encumbrances. And you've heard me speak from time to time about continuing appropriations and fund balances. If you're looking at the fund balance in the governmental funds balance sheet, please be aware that it doesn't include these encumbrances. And there is a danger if you appropriate all the fund surplus that you will include, you will doubly include the fund balance and the encumbrances. So I understand, that that hopefully everybody does have an understanding of this, but I wanted to be absolutely sure because it is really, really important to me and to you that you don't over-appropriate. The cash won't be there, and the danger is that we'll get back into deficits, which we absolutely certainly don't know what to do. Similarly, continuing appropriations is also a trap. They're kind of reported in here, but it's really, really hard to find them. But if you have a continuing appropriation and you spend it, you've got to consider, well, why wasn't it spent in a previous year? And the reason probably it wasn't spent in a previous year was there wasn't the revenues to match that expenditure in the previous year. And if you simply carry forward that appropriation, again, DOA is tasked with finding the cash. He would have to dig around to find the cash. So in supporting the public auditor, that you look very closely as best you can, and we'll certainly offer whatever support we can from DOA. Throughout my career, I've enjoyed and regarded it as very important to be able to explain financial figures to non-financial professionals. It's one of the things that I really want. I started my financial career, I now realize, like 52 years ago. And in those 52 years, one of the tasks that I really liked is to explain these numbers so that people understand them. So we'll be very happy to do that. I hope you will look at the PAFA. We also have to issue what is now called an ACFR, which is the financial statements in a format that's embedded with statistical information, such as population growth on Guam, all the cost indices, the number of tourists and all that kind of thing. So as we finish the audit, we are working on those too. So, and that's a task which perhaps was not appreciated, that DOA also has to undertake. Referring back to the lack of available professional accountants around the government, we certainly suffer from that at DOA. We are trying to work with the two academic institutions on the island to remedy that. We don't want to discourage potential employees from taking accounting courses and qualifying, and then obviously starting down a career with the government. We're competing with the private sector for these accountants, and in some cases, as I've mentioned to you before, Mr. Chairman, we're competing with ourselves, with the component units for these accountants. Again, we're working as hard as we can to recruit some accountants, and I'm pleased to say in the last 2 years we've managed to get some very good new talent, and you know, as they become more used to government accounting, and government accounting is very different from other accounting, I'm sure we will benefit from their learning and from their experience. We have a very decentralized system, and the public auditor referred to that in the fact that there weren't professional accountants in some of these other units that report in to make what Mr. Dueñas called the big audit. It was particularly noticeable in fiscal 23 with GDOE, because there was a very significant delay in reporting the numbers in because of the fact that they have very few accountants there, and they had a lot of transactions. We all had a lot of transactions when the federal funds came in. All of a sudden, we, before COVID, our federal grants ran around about 600 million, and in the next year, we all of a sudden had nearly 2 billion. So that was a significant task that we had to undertake. GDOE had a similar task in managing some of their federal funds, and that was a considerable delay. And GDOE is part of the general fund, so I cannot really give you a number for what I think the general fund number is going to be without getting GDOE in. Now, in the past, because the fact that we control the cash for GDOE, we could limit the exposure to a great deal because we send them about 5 million a week. So therefore, we know roughly what is going through them. But the issue we had, obviously, with last year was they had a lot of federal funds. They were kind of mixing up federal funds with local funds, and that's what caused a lot of audit work to be done. With respect to the federal funds that the rest of the government gets, yes, it's a lot. It was something around about 800 million that was reported in the fiscal 23 audit. Just to pick up the point about the federal receivables, yes, we know we have some hotspots. We know that Homeland is a hotspot that is causing a number of audits are going on with respect to Homeland, which actually started, the very first audit was DOA's own internal audit that highlighted some of these problems. But those are some funds that we cannot currently collect from the federal government. The amount that's reported as federal receivables, I think that's the point the public auditor brought up, as of September 30th, 23, was just under 71 million. But there was also, on the other side of the balance sheet, and that's why my best advice is be careful about just picking numbers out, because on the balance sheet there's lots of numbers. Owing to the federal agencies was 61 million. So the net of that is about 10 million. And that can be accounted for at a great deal with Homeland, with the difficulty or delays that we have in collecting funds for the Department of Military Affairs, because they have a separate system from all the other agencies. And simply timing, this week we sent out $8 million in Medicaid. So if you're looking at a point in time, there's always going to be federal money that is owing to the government. Our job is to keep it under control. I think we do a pretty good job at that, at least at DOA. But I do agree we do need more support in the large spending agencies, and public health is the largest spending agency. It has a number of programs. The biggest question cost was with respect to one of their programs, and it was the reason for the question cost was that they did not carry out certain tasks with childcare providers that they were required by the grant to have carried out. And that has to be corrected. Having said that, I don't recall, with one small exception which finally was actually resolved, ever having a question cost disallowed, because as soon as we find it out, we work to correct the deficiency and collect the funds. Just another point on the single audit. One of the other aspects that was pointed out was some issues that we have with procurement rules. The federal government says that we should apply our own local procurement rules to their purchases, and we strive to do that. When the auditors went and looked and said, well, we couldn't find any procurement documents, what they perhaps should have said was the procurement was done in a different way, in a non-compliant way, and that is something that we work constantly with the agencies to make sure that all the procurements are compliant. The agencies don't like it when either I or Ms. Rivers writes to them and says, you haven't done this the right way. We can't not pay a bill because a liability has been incurred, and the vendor, if not paid, will finally resort to a government claim, and that doesn't help anybody. So we try and pay what we can, but we do point out very clearly to agencies when they're not following the rules. And that's something that we have every day. One last point on the conduct of the audit, right? And the public auditor made reference to the fact that we really don't have a choice of auditors. There's one single firm that's on the island that performs these tasks, or is large enough to be able to carry out the audit of the government of Guam. We work with them, we try and work with them as closely as possible. The relationship, between auditor and auditee is very nuanced. And I can tell you from my own experience, when you complete an audit that does cost $625,000, and it's going to cost more this year. The pressure on those doing the audit to find an issue to report is very, very high. And I hope that those carrying out the audit use good judgment in deciding what is a matter to report and what is a matter to just resolve with management. I do believe that there needs to be a little bit of a reset with that. We've experienced comments that we get, and Ms. Rivers will refer to this a bit later, where in the past they've said, make this adjustment, and we didn't know why. Now we're asking, why are we making this adjustment? Are you absolutely sure that you should make this adjustment? And please give us the information that you put together to calculate this adjustment. I think this happened for the very first time in fiscal 23 in what I would call this interactive type of way of carrying out the audit. But as the public auditor said, they also suffer from not having sufficient accountants. We had an experience in fiscal 23 where the auditor that was dealing with one aspect of the financials left in June in the middle of the audit, and another auditor had to be put into that task and had to start the whole process all over again. DOA, and we will provide some, I don't think we can do it on a slide, but we can provide to you separately a chart which shows that most of our audit responses were available to the audit by the end of May of last year. We kind of saw a gap, and you'll see the gap on the chart. And I believe the reason for the gap is resources were being diverted to the GDOE issue and resolving GDOE. So many of the comments on our responses didn't come back until August. And then we had to pick up again and deal with those responses in August, not forgetting that 1 month later, at the end of September, we were starting another financial year with a whole new budget and a whole new a set of problems which DOA has to resolve. So the audit timing, yes, we were absolutely, no one wants to be in a state of continuous audit. It's not comfortable for us, it's not comfortable for the OPA, and it's not comfortable for the auditor. And we're going to do our very best to catch up these audits, which, as you heard, around the islands are way behind us. I mean, literally way behind where we are because of the lack of resources. And I think the problem, I know it wasn't a Pacific island, but the Virgin Islands is also suffering from having a similar lack of resources to actually complete their financial reports. So we will show you what our expected timeline is for the completion of the fiscal 24 audit. And in doing so, I would ask you to remember that fiscal 23 audit was completed by using information from the legacy accounting system. Fiscal 24 is half and half because we started the new FMIS system in February of last year, so half the information is coming from the old system and half the information is coming from the new system. All of fiscal 25 will be completed using information from the new system. And we'll talk more about as you've asked us to do, the implementation of the FMIS and the progress with that. So with that, if I may, I'll turn it over to Ms. Rivers to go through some of the slides that we brought.
Yes, please do. And Ms. Rivers, just identify yourself one more time for record-keeping purposes. Thank you.
Half a day and
Get
good
close to
morning.
the mic, too, so we can hear you just a little bit. There you go. Okay.
Half a day and good morning, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Teresa Rivers. I've been with the government of Guam for a year and a few months now. I'm from the private sector. I worked in banking for 27 years. So working in the government, it's an exciting opportunity, also very challenging, but it's a great opportunity to contribute to the government of Guam and supporting the financial team. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. So I wanted to just share with you or respond to the questions that were given to us. So if I may have the slides, please. So from our standpoint in Department of Administration, we also wanted to provide the reasons for the delay, and some of these were already shared with our colleagues at OPA. The first one was obviously the delay in getting the audit contract out, and this is obviously we had got one audit company on the island. The second one is a change in audit firms. Again, we referenced this in our M&DA portion of the audit. So a lot of that has been shared already, but having a new auditor and getting used to their approach and having them work with our team was a challenge last year. But we've built a collaboration with the auditors. We are, hopefully improve the way we engage this time around. So that's the goal. We don't want to necessarily, go down the point the finger side, but we want to work together to deliver on the audit. So the other key contributing factor to the delay was, again, the timelines, and that was shared by our director. We will continue to improve on that. We do have that Gantt chart. I believe we provided that in another response earlier. And again, referencing the accounted shortages. So those are the 4 key things that really caused a delay from our standpoint. It's basically kind of repeating what was already shared. So the next question that you ask us, what is the approximate release date for the FY 2024 audit? And will it be ready in June? Well, as you can see, and based on what was already discussed, the tentative or the goal is to deliver the financial statements audit at the end of November. That is a more realistic time frame that we can work with, and we're honest to say that. That is really what we can work towards. Time frame of June is a little unrealistic, considering we've just had the audit in February. We've got challenges with staffing, and as already mentioned, accountants. So yes, and that's the timeline. As you can see, from April to May, we're working on providing the key financial documentation and statements to start the audit. That's the trial balance and the CEFA. And then the planning, this is really from EY. This is their whole schedule of the audit. So yes, the best we can deliver on is November 2025. That's our realistic time frame. But we will work to see if we can get that down to October, but that's the best we can commit to at this stage. The next slide. And we were asked to provide an update on the implementation of the new financial system. So there are 6 modules to this financial system. The ERP, or the accounting and procurement system, is already live with multiple releases. The HR system is also live right now, and we're going through various release stages. These are now used by the agencies and HR. The data warehouse, thank you, sorry. The data warehouse is also live. There are, we're being able to provide budget versus actuals data to the agencies. We've started to do that so that we can both review the data, the financial data that's going out. We've gotten some really good feedback from some of the agencies and asking us about their data, especially their costs, their expenditures, which creates, it's good for us to get that feedback so we can make sure that the numbers are captured and reflected correctly in the financials. So that's something that we've started in the beginning of the financial year, this financial year. So it's not perfect yet. We're trying to make sure that the expenditures and the revenues are correctly captured as we complete the implementation of the system. The grants module and the budget modules, these are also live. The grants modules is actually live, but it's yet to be fully utilized. So the target date for agencies to utilize that based on the trainings that has been done and those that have been trained is the end of this month. There will be communications going out to the agencies that have been trained, their members that have attended the trainings in terms of the next steps. And payroll is live. We have 70% of the agencies on the payroll system. We are going through, the remaining agencies are migrating by the end of this month, by the end of April, and these are the large agencies. So we're continuing to work on, feedback that we're getting on things that are not working well, and those are managed in our weekly meetings with the GFMIS group. And I believe there was one last question. If we can go to the next slide, please. If the vendor has approached us for another module, and yes, there is a replacement of the TPS system or the system that's used by our TOG or the Treasurer of Guam team. This has been proposed and we have been reviewing it and it's under review at the moment. And I believe those were the questions that we were asked. And thank you for the opportunity to respond.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add some more to the financial picture generally. The financial picture compared with 10 years ago is totally different. We're reporting surpluses, and with the care that you and your colleagues attend to the budget and the management side attends to the details, I'm confident that we will continue to report surpluses in the future as far as we can possibly predict. Moody's in January last year upgraded our debt to investment grade, which hasn't happened for over 20 years, attributing part of the reason for doing that was improved financial control. And thank you to you and your colleagues for your part in bringing that about. S&P recently, and they're generally much more critical of the islands, changed our outlook to positive from what was basically negative before. So whenever we do go to the bond market, and we're going to have to certainly take on some debt this year with a new school, possibly spending on a new hospital. I know there's a need for a new detention facility. There's a whole lot of infrastructure projects that we're going to have to invest in over the next few years. We want to get our ratings, our credit ratings, as high as possible to reduce the cost of that investment. So all of this, put together, we want to make sure that we present the best financial picture possible. What we're working on at DOA is making sure that the interim financial numbers, the numbers that we look at every day or every month, are reliable, and that you and your colleagues can rely upon those numbers. And then when we get the audit simply confirms those numbers. In September, we released an estimate of the general fund surplus, and it was just under 30 million. When the audit came, I'm glad to say that it moved in the positive direction to 59 million, because moving in the opposite way is certainly not something we ever want to do. We're working on providing or putting together quarterly reporting, which we can do with the new system, so that we can get quarterly numbers out to you and to the public in a more useful fashion than the quarterly report that we do now, which is only Fund 100, doesn't include a lot of the liabilities that we've been talking about. And capitalizing on the new system to be able to separate out these numbers in a way that's going to be useful to the legislature, to us to guide it, and to guide the financial ship forward. So that's one of the things that we're really concentrating on. You won't see it in the audit, but you will see it as we come before you to report numbers. Today or yesterday evening, I believe you got the CRER, which we were able to issue on time this month with some more favorable numbers in it, and we'll continue to move forward in what I hope will be a positive direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne. Just a few comments before I go to some conclusion questions and then go to my colleagues for their questions. I don't disagree that the cash position remains solid, although it has shown that it's kind of starting to level off. The other issue is the exuberance for which appropriations are being requested in current fiscal year is far outpacing the balances in terms of what the balance is showing. That based on this audit report of the highlights, to me, the highlights already have us with a red flag in terms of the overall positioning and also going into this next fiscal year. One big surprise we got the other day, just to also shed the reason for which, I know this is not the most sexy thing to be doing on a Friday morning right now, but it's the most important thing we do here, is budgeting. And I will tell you, a pre-meeting with Guam Memorial Hospital made several of us kind of sit up in our chair with a request for $54 million above what the governor had asked and set the ceiling at. And their ceiling was already very much in consideration of what this legislature has done over the last 5 years, and had set them on a pace for close to 57 million, I believe, in their current year requested, and that was pharmaceutical and general fund. So just that number alone, and I want to make my final statement before we go into some conclusion questions, is you have to understand, and you're getting these same requests, and a lot of agencies are starting to report. We're also in a much different time when it comes to that category that was reported on federal funds. I've got many questions now for contingency plans coming from the media. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. So putting all these things together, I think this is the time to, you put out that November is your best estimate. That's going to take, I'm going to consider the 2023, and I think the public auditor will agree with me, as a dated and not a real tool for even considering in the 2026. So in my conclusion questions, I want to basically just ask a few, and then I'll go to my colleagues. The audit most likely be issued late again. We've already answered that. The true financial position of the government of Guam won't be known until it's completed and released. Appropriation requests, as I said, continue to be received in current fiscal year for current fiscal year revenues. So I think this is the multi-billion-dollar question. In the interim, how timely, complete, and accurate are the financial reports the legislature is currently receiving? Can these be relied upon to make good financial decisions when we don't have a starting point from the recently closed fiscal year until the start of fiscal year 2026? So I would just pose that to you, Ed, and to the public auditor.
May I start?
Sure.
Sure. A very wise man that I work for, it's not an original remark, but he often said it, was own the balance sheet and read the income statement. All our reports that we issue now are income statement reports. During the course of our discussion this Friday morning, we have actually referred a little bit to the balance sheet. The balance sheet is a picture at one point in time. This is September 2023. The next one we're going to get is September 2024. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, we want to have more solid interim financials that you, your colleagues, and everybody else can feel are numbers upon which they can rely. And when you get these kind of shock requests, such as you got from GMH, you can determine where in the background of the financial picture this all stands. Moving the problem that I mentioned with DOE is they were moving numbers back and forth between their federal expenditures and their local expenditures. And, to give them their due, what they were trying to do was maximize their federal capture. And who wouldn't want to do that? I guess it depends how you do it, and that's what you see on a balance sheet. So our goal will be to produce quarterly numbers that you can use to take the decisions that you're asked to take, such as that decision that you're going to have to make about GMH. So,
go ahead.
There really is nothing I can add. They're the ones that have the GFMIS.
Okay.
And if they can get it to spit out the quarterly reports, I've been trying to do that since I got this position.
That's what I'm trying to elicit from you, not a exactly.
So I'm hoping that they can.
So that would be a great improvement, correct?
It's an improvement.
And then also with trial balances, in terms of, so Ed, are you saying that you can get your trial balances out basically to start the big audit by the end of this month?
Yes, the CFO's undertaken to get the trial balance out by the end, I think it was April 1st, and the CEFA, which is the federal report, out by the 11th? April 11th.
Okay, so I guess the biggest thing too is, this is perennial, and this is where I want to go to, and maybe your commitment now and with this GFMIS coming forward to give us true and accurate and start getting to, which I think will be a really, really big development on quarterly reports. The perennial issues that we've seen that provide complications outside of what's happened nationally is programs that end with overruns, typical MIP, Medicaid, overtime, health medical expenses, like we said with a self-insured program now. So would we now be able to not find that out. I mean, we'll find out in an audit what we're going to find out in an audit. But my bottom line is this. Will we be able to track that so that it's kind of a sober view of expenditures so that the number that you're going to report on a CRER, while rosy and we're happy to have it, may not be realistic to actual tracking of over expenditures in other areas?
Yes, the answer is yes. To take a step back, in the days when deficits were reported, basically what was happening was vendors were financing the government because we weren't paying vendors, and so their funds were actually funding the government. We no longer have that issue because now we're reporting surpluses. So the picture is much easier to see, and the reported accounting number and the reported cash number should be much closer. So the financial shock should be removed.
So I guess I'll just ask one of my conclusion questions, and that is, and this should be true for the big audit, I think, Mr. Speaker, as well, is that in the big audit, are there disparate systems within the audit financials, financial systems, financial management systems that cause issues with regard to being able to report and be able to provide proper information for the big audit?
In my discussions with, at least in the last couple of years, there are agencies that are not responding as quickly as he needs. And I'll let him be the one to tell you which ones he's having problems with, because he has been having problems with some.
As I said a bit earlier, we have a very decentralized system. GDOE doesn't report to us their numbers quarterly or at all, actually, until we look at their their audit. Yes, we have issues, and it's adequately reported in the federal findings, where an agency will make a report to a federal agency, but not check with us that that's what the books say. And it's called out several times in the federal findings. When we went through the audit, the auditors mentioned, well, you reported this, but when we looked at the books, it was a different number. And we had to point out to them that if somebody pulled a number out of the system, and that's all they did on, say, October the 30th, and then the auditors come along 9 months later and pull a number out from the system of October the 30th, in that intervening period, entries have gone in, and this is the crux of the problem. Entries have been posted which changed the ledger amount, but didn't then correspond with what was reported to the federal granting agency. Late submission of information, and it's no secret, Senators, that we're getting late invoices because you see that report that the agency has to give to the Speaker when they're paying a prior year obligation. We're still getting invoices for fiscal 24, and we're still having to make adjustments for fiscal 24 because of information or lack of information that comes from agencies. And then we also have agencies that we have to literally pry information out of, such as, the Guam Election Commission. It's part of the general fund, but they don't report to us on a regular basis We eventually get the information when we ask for it, sometimes several times over, I believe. But that's effort, that's wasted effort when we could be putting to a more useful occupation. And when you add all these things up, then some of them are not very big individually, but when you add them all up, you're talking of something like 20 to 30 million.
Thank you. You know, given the volume of information that you've been provided, I think that this has actually been quite efficient, you know, and how complicated these numbers are. So I want to thank my colleagues for their patience. I want to thank Senator Sabina Paris for joining us at this time. So I'll start the questioning with my colleagues, with my Vice Speaker, Ada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. So you were mentioning that the audit now would be the release date would be November 30, 2025. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So now how does that affect now future audits, and when is it that we're going to start getting the audits submitted on time so that the OPA be able to do their job and report on time as well? I mean, if we keep delaying, we don't see it from June now to November, so are we going to be seeing the same thing over and over again, or are we going to eventually get on track? And
yeah, like I said, no one wants to be in a constant state of audit. We're going to do what we can to catch up. Like the public auditor said, some of the other jurisdictions, some of the other islands are way behind, and what actions they have to take to catch up, I cannot possibly imagine. We're fortunately not that far behind, but we certainly intend, you know, in fiscal 26 to get to the point where we do complete the audit on time.
yeah, and you know, I thank you for that, but you know, I'm not worried about the other islands and jurisdiction at this point. I'm only worried about where we're at today and how we're reporting and how we are moving things forward, and how are we going to eventually get caught up, being that we're always behind.
In my discussions with Mr. Byrne, with this new GFMIS and the commitment that they have now that they have a CFO to get quarterly, at least quarterly, I wanted monthly reconciliations, but at least quarterly reconciliations. My hope is that when we issue the audit sometime in late October, early November, that we can immediately, and I know he doesn't want to go into none of us want to be in audits constantly, but we need to do the entrance conference for this almost the day after it's released. And hopefully with the GFMIS supposedly going to be able to provide numbers with the quarterly reports that are going to be out, maybe my hope is to catch up in the following audit.
And we hope for that as well. You know, and Mr. Byrne, you did say that, you know, vendors used to be the backbone of how things are paid, right? And now that the actual cash and surplus should be a better view of it being closer. And you know, out there in the public, we run into a lot of the vendors of the government of Guam. Are we up to date with all our vendor payments?
There's two stages, Vice Speaker, in a vendor payment. Mm-hmm. There's the vendor sending it to the
agency.
The agency that, or maybe not the right agency, but to an agency in the hope that it's going to be paid, and the agency sending it to us. In this decentralized system, you have to accept that there's going to be some delay in that. We have made some considerable progress in getting vendors to send the invoices straight to us. We're also going to require agencies and it's part of the new system called XFlow, where you can scan a an invoice and the system recognizes the invoice and extracts the numbers and posts that invoice. We're going to certainly move towards that. I recognize, and always have recognized, that prompt payment of invoices is one of the ways that we can save the government money, because then vendors don't price the delay into their pricing, or don't feel that they have to price the delay into their pricing. So yes, we've made progress, and we'll continue to make progress. Again, we have to rely upon some of these agencies to actually give us those invoices promptly and clearly. Right? You know, sometimes we'll get an invoice to pay and it says, well, only pay this amount, but then we don't know why. So then we have to go back and find out why we're only paying that amount, and generally there's a story behind that.
Yeah, usually the story is that the government will pay out this invoice if you give us a discount, and I don't think that should be the story behind it. I think what needs to be is that whatever the vendors charge the government, those invoices should be paid immediately. I mean, it really gets disheartening when we continuously see surpluses throughout the year, but yet vendors are coming up saying that they're not getting paid. And I understand that two-step process. However, when they say that all their paperworks are already turned in and we're just waiting payment from DOA, then that also becomes a concern. And perhaps, again, maybe something that should happen is that should we turn around now and give vendors interest payments for invoices that have not been paid. These are things that we need to look at, because I don't think the small businesses or the vendors should carry the burden of the government because the government can't pay their bills, but yet we keep continuously saying that we have surpluses, but we have vendor payments due. I mean, the GFMIS is a great system. Are we paid off with this system as well, or is this being paid on a contractual basis?
It is, Senator. It's a 5-year project.
And are we up to date on this vendor payment?
Yes.
So
because they remind us. We have meetings with them every week, and they remind us constantly if we're not.
Yeah, we don't want this system to shut down, do we?
No. But may I just say that most of the payment is not the running of the system; it's the innovation of the system.
All right. And for how are we with being that all the financial information's on this? Are we protecting this system with the cybersecurity, and is this also included with this system?
Yes, we've had discussions. It came up at an earlier hearing. It's a Microsoft-based system. Microsoft is fully certified, or whatever they need to be for cybersecurity.
So we don't have to worry about any hacks on this system.
Actually, we required the system to be run in the mainland. So it's actually more secure than some other systems.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker Atta and Vice Chairman of this committee. Senator Taitigui, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and most especially good afternoon to those who are presiding. Just staying on cybersecurity, I think, if anything, if there's another mechanism in the event that it is shut down, because nothing is perfect, and we've seen that in cybersecurity, even the FBI gets hacked. So if the event that for some reason it shuts down, is there another mechanism in which we can follow, like not so much digital but analog, to go back to in the event the IS falls short?
It's a system that's totally in the cloud. We don't have any equipment on island at all for this system. It's backed up on the mainland. They are required to have adequate backup equipment there. It's one of these big data centers. So the only thing that would prevent us being able to do that is a lack of internet service to here. And as as you perhaps have learned, we've got like 13 cables, internet cables coming to the island. So the likelihood of that happening, I honestly believe, is much less for this system than many of the other systems that we maintain.
Well, there's some issues that Rev and Tax actually has too with regards to their system, and they have that company off island as well. The problem is that, you know, they're trying, if something goes down at Rev and Tax at 8 o'clock in the morning, well, over there in the mainland, it's, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they can't seem to get anybody to answer their phone to assist them when it's needed right away. So have you come into any situations like that where you had to...
No, a Rev and Tax Senator is a locally based system.
Yeah, but it's off island too. They have a contract off island with someone right now.
Well, not that I know of, but maybe you know a little bit more than I do. But no, we haven't. We had, I think, an interruption. The longest one we had was about 35 minutes.
Okay, so we're not going to see any more delays in CRER reports then?
We're absolutely going to try. Well, maybe I'll ask Ms. Rivers to comment on that.
The goal is to ensure that we get the CRER to you within the time frame that's requested, and we managed to do that in the last few months. One of the key things that we're working with our team is also to understand the numbers that we're providing and make sure the numbers that comes across, it can be explained. We're not sending just the numbers, but provide the commentaries that, you know, covers the what were the key highlights. So yes, the goal is to ensure that we deliver the CRER by the 20th.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned earlier to ensure that cash is available, Mr. Burns, when you were talking, to always make sure that it's there. I'd like to ask both you and the OPA to ensure that accountability of funds that are there, that we don't go into deficit, that we're able to, you know, cover any expenses, especially at the end of the year. Again, I'm going to ask you, and I've asked you this before, how much, when we receive the CRER report on page 3, when it indicates how much money is in surplus, how much to be responsible enough to keep in that surplus to the end of the year? What is that figure?
Well, I think the question that I was asked was, how much money should we have on hand at any one time?
Yeah.
And my answer was and is that the GFOA says we should have 6 months worth of expenses on hand. That in current situation for local funds is about 450 million. So we've got a bit of a way to go before we manage to keep that on hand. You know, our rainy day fund is now in the 50 millions, so we're certainly getting there. But the accumulation of cash balances takes time, but we're always going in the right direction. And if you look at, I would actually have a little caution on that, but if you look at the fiscal 23 balance sheet, cash and cash equivalencies are 646 million. We also have to make sure that we don't have idle cash that's caught up in somewhere and is not being used appropriately. So we have a DOA, we have a daily cash report, and we look at the cash coming in and the cash balances, but you know, we never want to go back to the days when I first came to DOA and we were having emergency cash meetings because we couldn't meet our liabilities.
So in excess revenue that we're trailing at the end of the year, in other words, there was one time that you mentioned to me that we should have at least $20 million in excess revenue that, you know, if the CRE report is expending. That's the number I'm looking for. Is that still true to form?
Excess revenue, that's a slightly different question, but the excess revenues, that would be a comfortable balance.
Of 20?
Of 20, but that's scalable, because if our expenditures increase, you know, by a large amount, then you'd have to scale that 20 million.
So 20 is about the number? Okay, you're still, and public auditor, how much do you think should stay in that CRER at the excess revenue at the end of Any comments?
No, I don't.
Okay, no comments, okay. The other one is with the public auditor, you mentioned in discussion regarding the retirement fund and its obligation from the past, and that there is something, we owe money out to certain retirees. Do you remember that conversation we had with regards to retirement and we still have an obligation? There's a,
Yes, by law, they send you annually before he makes the budget, a percentage that is to be sent to the retirement fund to keep it on, to pay down the deficit by 2035, I believe. Huh? 34 or 35. That there currently is a deficit in that outstanding obligation, but we're slowly paying that down.
what is that obligation? How much is that right now to date?
2.4 billion? I think it's,
So you would consider this still a deficit for the government of Guam?
yes, and the report that I'm getting from the retirement fund is that we're on track to meeting that as long as
We pay it yearly, a certain
pay
percentage?
that percentage.
And, okay,
It's 1.8 billion.
How
as
much?
of 1.8 billion at September 23.
okay, thank you. And then we pay that yearly, right? We pay a yearly amount every year to to retirement, correct?
Well, in
And that-
every pay period, there's an augmented amount that's, there's a
Yeah, to
employee
pay.
contribution, an employer contribution, and we augment that employer contribution to start to pay down that debt.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any, it's, sometimes we get information late with regards to finances that may impact our general fund. One of them, for instance, is Medicaid. I've gotten notice that Medicaid may stop, or that we are in it, well, according to the OPA's office, we're finding some questionable costs in Medicaid and Medicare on that OPA report. Now we're finding out that there may be some federal funds that will be cut, or frozen, and that the general fund may have to subsidize it. Well, it's up to this, body if we want to subsidize it. But is there any way that DOA can create a, newsletter to us, especially the legislature, that these areas may be frozen and this is how much it costs? So let's say, for instance, Medicaid. They give us, X amount, $100 million a year to cover that. If it's no longer there, then MIP, which is subsidized by the general fund, may have to be increased if we're going to cover these individuals. So is there anything that the DOA can provide this body on a monthly basis or weekly or whenever it's an emergency situation on reports to give to us so that we know ahead of time?
We'd be certainly very happy to do that. If you could perhaps give us some items that you want us to cover, we will certainly be able to do that.
Well, sometimes we don't have those items. Sometimes it's been given to the administration and it keeps us in the dark here. That's why I'm saying, things that we hear on the news, of course, or an OPA audit is done, but there's sometimes, like this Medicaid, nobody seemed to know about.
Okay,
like Hawaii, for instance, not receiving Medicaid anymore. That's the latest rumor. So things like that.
Yes, and perhaps I could address that, Senator, about Medicaid, because we got some news overnight on that, is that we are not having the same problem with Medicaid reimbursements that the states are. All the territories are getting their Medicaid allotments, and like I said, we paid out $8 million last week, so I know that that's working. And the principal reason I believe behind that is that the territories have a Medicaid cap whereas the states don't. So I guess the federal government was looking at it and say, I don't know what the highest liability I have because the states don't have a cap, but the territories do, and that's why we're not experiencing the same delays.
That was just an example. Like, for instance, Homeland Security, we have an issue with that as well. Questionable costs that are been, the OPA is reporting. And sometimes when you have these questionable costs, the federal government will freeze, any kind of, or not provide you any reimbursement. So this kind of information is very helpful for us, because instead of writing bills that create, give out money to every, agency that requests it, we have to keep in mind that there are areas that may have to be covered because of certain circumstances that put us in this predicament. So this kind of information would be very helpful to us. So I appreciate that if you can look into that.
No, certainly.
Yeah.
We'll look
Thank
at
you
that.
so much. I appreciate that. And Public Auditor, you mentioned on page 14 of your presentation regarding Healthy Futures Fund, the negative in Healthy Futures Fund, I believe in FY24 was, or 20, was it 24? Was 12 million, but we're looking at 23 here. Yeah, I don't have those numbers. I think it was more than 5 million. You're only estimating the 5 million from the Healthy Futures Fund, page 14, for FY23. This is FY23, correct? Okay. But
Yes.
there were more. It was much more than 5 million that was short in FY23. I was just wondering if those numbers are correct.
The revenue went down. That's the
Right.
decrease.
Right, 5 million only, but I think it was based on the revenues or the appropriated amount. You're basing it on revenues and not appropriated amount? Okay, that explains it. Okay. What is the questionable cost total for? Okay, so my next question is, what is the questionable cost total for federal funds? Do you have that total amount?
In what program?
Oh, all of them. You take all the federal funds
For
that we've been
23
giving for
was 35.
yeah,
15 million, I'm sorry.
15 million so far? In
In the 23 audit.
in 23?
I don't know what the 24 is.
Okay, just for 23. So a total cost of 15 million in questionable costs for federal funds. What about questionable cost in general fund? Any funds that were given in the general fund to any agencies that were, misused, not correctly appropriated, that has to be pulled back, or, those are questionable costs.
That would be done separately with the different agencies. And we'd have to be doing one for every single agency, and we don't do that right now.
Oh, okay.
And also,
yeah, but
just so that everybody understands, the question cost is only the question cost of the amounts that the number of items that they look at and the amount that comes up to. That's not the entire universe, so.
okay, and that carries over. For the both of you, how do you feel about, because we're not going to be seeing this surplus that we have been in the past with over $2 billion, $2.6 billion that was given to Guam, probably not going to see that surplus. So how do you feel about allowing, especially the public auditor, how do you feel about allowing agencies to just continue to use lapses? It makes it kind of difficult. In the past, we've allowed these agencies who was given an appropriation, they have lapses, and after years and years of continuing to allow lapses to go on, we really don't have a way to account for how much lapses they've been tucked away for how many years. So is this something that we should really caution ourselves about, allowing these agencies to not have lapses, use their lapses, to say, okay, if you didn't use it by the end of the fiscal year, then it goes back to the general fund. And that's a lot easier way to keep track of that money that wasn't spent.
It all depends on which agency you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
It depends on which agency or department you're talking about. Because some agency and departments actually receive money separate. The Department of Administration gives them 1/12 of their appropriation, and they have it in their own separate bank account. And
It's reserves, right? You're talking about the reserves?
it's not reserves, it's their monthly allocation. They get a monthly allocation, and you have to make a policy decision of whether or not you want them to spend it because it's August, or you give it to them and say they can hold that and spend it later. I know the Department of Administration has problems with the agencies for which they don't get their full monthly, and then they claim that in 2023 they had lapse fund, but they never had the cash in their control. That's different from some departments that actually have cash and cash in an account and a bank account in their name. If one looks very carefully at all of the audits of the semi-autonomous agencies, they have amounts that are banked, cash that's in a bank, that's from previous fiscal years.
Yeah.
That hasn't been returned. But some departments only get the operating costs. And so it's different, and I'll have Department of Administration speak to that.
Yeah, when I was talking about reserves, public auditor, I was mentioning that they're not given their full allotment. A certain percentage, 2% I think, is set aside. And at the end of the year, they, like for instance, veterans, we saw the veterans, they held off on not giving their full allotment. And then I guess it's management, cash management to ensure they don't overspend. I understand the situation, but at the end of an FY fiscal year, there's money that's sitting in there, that should be accounted for, because when it comes for us appropriating funds, we know that there's money that hasn't been utilized, and we could use that money or not appropriate the full amount because we know they have lapses. Mr. Burns, please.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And in support of what the public auditor said, there's really two conditions. There's a condition where a line agency, like you're talking about Veterans Affairs, doesn't, for whatever reason, and generally it has something to do with either not getting enough employees or procurement, doesn't spend their entire budget in 1 year, because they're a line agency, there's not really a cash issue. That's our job to manage. But there might be a budgetary issue, and that's their job to manage. And there's the second condition where we provide funding to agencies that manage themselves. Then cash might well build up in there if they don't spend it for the purpose that you intended when you appropriated those funds. In general, like I said before, I am not in favor of continuing appropriations. I should have said there is a condition where there is an exception in my view, and that's if you have an existing contract that needs to be liquidated in future years. That's what the federal government does. They have a specific continuing appropriation to pay those specific obligations. But in general, continuing appropriations are cash killers. It's the best way I can put it.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Other than that, I greatly appreciate the information, and of course, providing any kind of other information that warns us of some circumstances that we may have to now subsidize with general fund. It'd be very helpful as we move forward. Other than that, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to ask some questions, and look forward to even more discussions on the finances of the government. This is a good hearing that, as you mentioned, Mr. Dueñas earlier, that this is the first time, and I hope it's the first time of many more to come, so that we are very aware of what's going on with our finances. It's the people's money. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Senator Parrish, you're recognized this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone here today. And thank you for your presentations. Just if you can clarify, so on page 6, Public Auditor, of your presentation, it shows total revenues and total expenditures. And from the look of it, it appears we're still running in the positive as far as funds is up to 2023. Is that correct?
It's been going in that direction, yes.
Okay. But we still run in the positive. We're not negative at this point, because I guess the concern is we have a lot of supplemental appropriations, including this session coming up, and we just want to be assured that we have money available.
There is, at least in the chart. And at this point, I'll probably interject, and I'm going to kick myself for doing this. There's still some money that hasn't been realized, all right? The Healthy Futures Funds I was being asked about earlier, in our performance audits, separate from our financial audits, in our performance audits, we've been saying that the collection of sin taxes from alcohol and tobacco is not being fully realized, because we believe there's some leakage somewhere. And we've made recommendations to address that, which not only this legislature, past legislatures refuse to address. There's the Tobacco Stamp Act that was passed 7 years ago that still hasn't been implemented. So we don't know whether or not we've collected all of the tobacco tax. And my recommendation to do it at the port doesn't want to be implemented, so that's not being collected. We're going to be releasing within the next month a report, because I'm convinced that the alcohol tax has not been fully collected. Because you just go to any party, any of your meetings, the amount of alcohol that's flowing anywhere, it just doesn't seem that, you know. The other one that I pointed out is the use tax. Customs and Quarantine still hasn't, thankfully the last legislature passed the Harmony legislation, but that's still not happening. They lost that fund, they lost that funding. And so it's not going to happen. And we've felt that the amount of money that's lost in not collecting all the use tax that should be collected, with the plane loads of Amazon landing, there's still a lot there. There's still a lot that hasn't been collected. But we've made the recommendations. The collection has still not happened, and it's been 5 years since we made the recommendation on getting the use tax up, and it's still not being done.
Okay, thank you for that response. So the other question I have regarding your presentation was on page 11. It talks about Federal Grants Assistance Fund. So 58.51 million receivables, of which 10.8 million is uncollectible. Which agencies still owe the general fund federal monies?
The only one that I'm clearly aware of is Homeland Security and and that's only 10 of the 58. DOA, and Mr. Brink, correct me if I'm wrong, is saying since some of that 48 is the accrual differences and timing issues. The reason why I said earlier, and maybe you heard it when you were watching, that I said put a pin in it, that what's happening with today and what's been happening that may come out in the 24 audit and is being realized now is the chaos in Washington, D.C., and the closure of the U.S. DOE may mean that we're not going to be able to address the issue of the collection of a $51 million collection for DOE that's not even in this 58. The amount doing from the federal government as of the other day was probably 3 times this amount. And with what's happening in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure how you're going to address some of that. Maybe Mr. Brink can help you out with what's there, but I'm just saying this amount has been going up, and purposely in my highlights I put the fact that 3 years ago it was 15, then it went to 22, then it went to 33, then it went to 58. This one, the 24, I'm afraid is going to be reporting twice or 3 times that amount, and I don't know.
Thank you. If I can put my perspective on this, the federal receivable has increased because the federal funding has increased. And yes, a lot of it is due to timing. We look at this every day. Our federal section, and with the change of hours in Washington, they've actually restricted the number of hours where you can draw down the funds. The federal section has to do it from home because it's outside our working hours. But they look every day at what can be drawn down and what is being prevented from being drawn down. As I mentioned earlier, we're really lucky that we don't have too much being prevented. And the chaos that the public auditor referred to hasn't really descended on us yet. We're waiting for not with great expectation, but we're on the lookout for any things that we don't think we can draw down. The exception, as he says, is Homeland Security. It was an agency entirely funded by federal funds. And then when the federal government started to look into how they were spending it, they began to ask some questions, and those questions eventually resulted in their federal reimbursements being frozen. That isn't the case with most other agencies. They're just either dealing with this timing delay, because it generally takes 2 to 3 days to draw down the federal funds, or some operational issue, somebody has a question, in the federal government has a question which the spending agency has to resolve.
Yeah, so it looks like the general fund fronts the money, and then we get the reimbursement from the federal government. So how quickly is the turnaround time for that, usually?
It's usually 2 to 3 days.
Okay. Okay, great. And then regarding the other findings on page 17, so I guess there's lack of documentation to support some of the expenses. Is there a corrective action plan in place? And are they, the relevant agencies, are they actually implementing those correction plans to ensure that accounting is proper?
They're supposed to have a corrective action plan in place. We may need to have separate performance audits done on some of these other agencies. I think I mentioned at the AGA conference, and Chairman Dueñas was there, that the compliance report gives me ideas of where I can do additional performance audits. I may need to do a performance audit on this Child Care Development Fund because of the fact that they had and that's when I go through there and I see there's problems here, they're not complying. That's how I found out about the besides DOA's internal audit, that's how we found out that we should look at Homeland Security. And so we're constantly looking to see where there are problems, and unfortunately, this is someplace that is ripe for performance audits.
Okay, thank you. And then for the next page, talks about seems to be a discrepancy between what is reported locally and what is reported federally. And I know you mentioned that it's I guess, one way that hopefully we can address it is training. We have capacity within these agencies who can make sure that they're reconciled. But to what extent can our automated system integrate or have a built-in way to catch these things in real time? And is that one of the goals?
So the GFMIS federal module that's currently being implemented will significantly help the federal team monitor those reporting. What has happened in the past, they were also not necessarily involved when those reports are submitted by the grantees. So one of the things that we're doing right now is the federal team are requesting agency that are submitting those reports to include them so they can also review to provide, to ensure these are corrected before they're submitted. So that wasn't an enforcement in the past. The grantees submit their reports themselves, and the federal team will only be aware of it when the reports are seen on the system. So now with the new federal module, I believe our federal team will be a lot more equipped to provide that support and be able to capture and correct those reporting deficiencies.
So that's in progress, or that's in place
It's
right
in
now?
progress at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And then the next page, 19, talks about the streetlight fund. So I have a special interest in that fund. I've sent a couple of FOIAs, and so it's interesting to see that the first FOIA was very different from the second FOIA. And then I'm seeing this now, there's 840,000 payables due. And I guess the question for me is, because we've changed over to a new system, how have we verified that the system is verified, the information is accurate? And I could share this with you because I'm seeing two different numbers from two different FOIAs, and I'm wondering if it's because of the system.
Well, if I could, I'm not sure which numbers you're referring to, and we'd be happy to look at those. I guess the FOIAs came from us, so we'll look at the numbers, and maybe they were drawn up on a different basis. But addressing the streetlight fund generally, it used to go along kind of okay, and there was generally a shortfall of about 800,000 at the end of each year. With Typhoon Mawar, it's no surprise to anybody that some of the street lights don't work. So DPW has adopted the practice of not paying the whole bill that came from GPA, and it's not based on metered amounts, it's based upon per pole numbers. And some of them were the old type of lighting system, and some of them were the new LED system, and some of the very new street lights are solar, and therefore there's no charge at all to the streetlight fund. And we're having to adapt to all these different changes. So I thank you for looking into it. I believe it does need looking into, because it's kind of a number that we can't put our thumb on at the moment.
If I might add on the streetlight fund, I have had discussions with my auditors about doing a cost-benefit analysis on the streetlight fund, and seeing how much the solar lights that were put up in Tumon, how much they cost, and how much it would cost to do it island-wide, and what the savings would be. Addressing that with the earlier policy of the streetlight fund and the way the government pays. GPA in the past was to try to offset and try to give them additional money when they were still part of the government. But I think now and I'm hoping that we can prove it in our performance audit, that we can do a cost-benefit analysis, that if we spend or invest X millions of dollars initially to buy all the solar lights for island-wide, we would save on, it would make up and be repaid within maybe 2 or 3 years of the amounts that we're paying with the solar, with a streetlight fund. GPA may not like that, but I think we've got to try to figure out where we can make some savings.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I did introduce a bill to change the streetlight fund so it could be, I guess, work in that fashion, where we have DPW being really the one spearheading this process, which really makes sense. So I think those are my questions for now, and I appreciate your time and efforts in your presentation today and all the work that you've done to make sure that we are, spending properly, not overspending, and making the wisest use of our vital public funds. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Perez, and Senator Ada had maybe a couple of follow-ups.
Yeah, just to follow up, and it's interesting how we were speaking about vendor payments and Homeland Security. So I just got a message, perhaps, Mr. Byrne, you can, if you have any knowledge of this, that the DLAN for Guam Homeland Civil Defense was disconnected, I guess, for non-payment, for 3 years of non-payment.
The which, sorry, Senator?
DLAN, the Disaster Local Area Network.
No, I don't know, but
Yeah, so this is the system that, in case of emergencies, this is the emergency management system that we rely on for asset distribution during emergencies and recovery management.
I'm sure when I get back to the office, there'll be a message.
Yeah, if we can see what we can.
Yes, sir, of course. Yes, that's not...
Yeah, we were talking about vendor payables, and anything past 90 days. I mean, this is really a concern. I mean, should a disaster happen and we don't have this system up, I can imagine what I wouldn't want to imagine.
Yes, sir.
So, with this new system, the GFMIS, I hope that we're able to really catch up on issues and get this vendor payables done immediately and on time. And like I said, I wouldn't want to go back to the process of every time an invoice is late being paid, that the government now owes the vendor money instead of the vendor owes the vendor additional payments for late payment. I mean, whenever the people owe the government money, either they freeze our accounts or something is garnished. We want to make sure that we reciprocate to the vendors that they're paid on time, because they're the ones that carry the burden for this government as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Senator Perez, if you have one question on procurement, I will allow it because we're about ready to close, but yeah.
Yeah, generally, I do want, there was a assessment, a needs assessment done, and it was talking about the federal cycle versus the local expenditure cycle. And so it's out of alignment, and so it really limits the ability for agencies to spend the federal funds, which can, put us at risk of leaving federal funds on the table. And so I guess it's my ask that, again, I know this GFMIS system was supposed to help facilitate procurement, and so if you can help kind of address this issue.
Yes, I think you might be referring to the need to close off procurement before the end of the year. Yeah, we're looking at this. The intent was to allow sufficient time for bids to be completed once started by the end of the year, and you have to start that now to go through the bid cycle. But I do agree that we need to be very careful about closing a system that the government runs on.
Yeah, because their cycles, federal cycles are from January to December. Ours is from October to September, right? So, yeah, it puts them in a bind. So if you can help to address that, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you.
Not directly addressing yours, but I know that the chairman received a request or some comment by GORA stating that they're in a predicament because they're complaining. They have to remember, GORA is a part of the government of Guam. It is a component unit of the government of Guam. And its audit, if it's not completed, his audit can't be completed. And that's the reason why 5 years ago, when GORA was delayed, it delayed the release of the GovGuam audit. And so I know they said they have a completely different time period and they have to put it into a federal system. I've sat with them on some of the status conferences that they've had. They're not fully into the federal system. And if we had to wait until they got cleared by their inclusion into the federal system, we'd never be able to get ours out. We'd be back at 22. And Mr. Byrne and I discussed it, and maybe the thing that they're going to have to do is have 2 audits. Pay for one to get us closed and do one for them to get them closed. But they can't hold us up.
Thank you, Senator Perez. And so I just wanted to ask one more question of the OPA, and then I'm going to go to the closing on this. I think the public needs to understand this because it's so critical in terms of the work that you do. And you made a big impression on me when you discussed this with me in several of your meetings, and that is, right now we have an inversion of audits. We have actually, I think Mr. Dueñas can address this as well, we have a situation where we're spending almost 3/4 of our time during the year doing financial audits as opposed to performance audits. And that really, that inversion, from what I understand from you, is really preventing us from getting more corrective actions and things done and more accountability, because that really is where you should be. Can you address that, Mr. Auditor?
Yes, ideally, what I was hoping, and as Mr. Burns said, none of us want to be in continuous financial auditing. What I was hoping was that we could, at least in my office, devote November, December, January, February, and March to overseeing the financial audits, and have the other months to doing performance audits. But the problem with this not catching up is we're overseeing financial audits, and at the same time that we should be doing performance audits, and we have to QAR both of them, and we have a very small staff, and they're just really stretched. I was trying to get the SHPO audit out, but there was, the QAR was doing a financial audit, highlights, and it's, if we could segregate the times, but we until such time, and I'm hoping by the end of 26, that we'll be able to catch up and we'll be able to get back. So I'm really hoping for it, because it would help me be able to produce more performance audits if I could devote that time to performance audits and not be having to oversee financial audits.
Excuse Masi, Mr. Auditor, I'm going to keep you on time for lunch. I'm a little hungry myself. First of all, I wanted to say that I think this was a very productive meeting. I'm highly encouraged, first of all, having met Ms. Rivers. I think you scored, Ed, knowing her background in business banking, and she indicated to us when we made our visit there that she has done much larger turnovers in terms of information systems. And one of the things she mentioned was, in all of her experience in the banking world, you know, they have a advanced team that goes into this effort that really kind of lays out all the parameters within the units to be able to, implement and get good turnaround. And that includes educating all of those who have to run the systems. That includes the ASOs, the AOs, and maybe just the guy who does running around to get supplies. But the bottom line is that I was really, I think, Ed, between that and my visit to other divisions, it was really a positive outcome with regard to that. Even GSA's got one of your audit people, Mr. Speaker, and a lot of the young talent that hopefully we could hold on to, because I'll tell you, they were very encouraged, and they'd seen some positive outcomes with their temporary assigned person over at GSA as well, Andy. So she's doing a great job as well. Now comes to where only my vice speaker is going to hear this, but I think this will be probably news. I wanted to do this because I'm going to adopt a policy, a standing policy within OFB. And I know it's going to be difficult for some of my colleagues, but I think it's important at this time. For all of the bills that have come into our area of responsibility, I'm going to not hear them until we can get a clear path in terms of audited financials. I think that's very important. I think that the fact that you now are on pace to at least get us to a quarterly reconciliation, something that we can count on somewhat, and that type of arrangement, I think right now it's irresponsible to spend in current year financials with unaudited financials. I will announce that there will be exceptions to this. The exception is emergencies. Those emergencies will be defined as a call to session by the governor or a call to special session by the speaker, in where they will make their declaration of what the emergency is and why we cannot fund the requests within our current fiscal year budget. The governor has had a very generous account with transfer authority within the last 6 years. I expect the administration, in every case where component units are eligible for transfers, for whatever shortfalls they have, to be adopted in that way. I know this is going to be difficult, and I will say this. This is my policy. This is a deliberative body. There's 14 other members that I greatly respect. If I'm overturned, I'll be overturned, and I will accept that. But what I will say that is that I did my responsibility to hold the line, and that if other members feel as though that policy should be vacated, I will respect it. This is a body of 15 members. But I think that emergency session called by the governor or called by the speaker is adequate to determine that those funds are absolutely necessary. And I also feel this way. Many of those items that I've been receiving, and I don't know why, are appropriations whereby special units, entities and units, agencies are saying, you know, they have inadequate budgets. Like I said, transfer authority, or the time to solve that is going into the budget season. I look forward to a very, very good discussion about the 2026 revenues. Like I mentioned to you earlier, sticker shock wasn't the word the other day, and I'll close with this. One of the largest requests, over almost half of that request from GMH, was CIPs. We don't necessarily, and we don't usually, I mean, we got to be so cash solvent that we actually go out there and spend on capital improvement projects that were anticipated and had other funding sources that were diverted, and then fall that back to the general fund. I just think that we've got to be different in that approach, find other approaches to it, and if it's a true CIP that is something part of our other financial picture that we look to amortize, then I think that with our financial position, that's the way we should look at those things. But outright appropriations on that level, and then changing it to what would become essentially a fixed cost, because you would look like you were cutting the budget of that entity the next year when you said, well, we were able to support you for your CIPs, but then they'll say on the next budget cycle, wait, you cut us by 25 million. No, we didn't, because that was a line item as opposed to your operations. And so, like I said, I know this is not going to meet very friendly with my colleagues, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's the prudent thing to do, given our environment and given where we're at. So with that, I thank you once again, Public Auditor and your team, Mr. Dueñas. I want to reiterate again, you have an unlocked door. I mean, everybody that I know that I've talked to has been able to walk in. Mr. Byrne, I thank you for taking me on the tour of DOA and speaking with individuals directly on the issues that they're confronted by. That's why I had such a pleasant meeting with Ms. Rivers to understand where they're at. Their presentation today is probably about 10 to 20% advanced from even when I met, I believe. So that shows that we're making progress. With that, I want to thank everyone for being here. My vice chair, the vice speaker, for hanging with me all the way through, and I will call this informational hearing adjourned at 11:45. Si Dios Masi.